So in this video, we're going to talk about the production possibilities curve. So maybe you've taken an econ class before, or maybe back in high school, you remember the production possibilities curve, or maybe you remember it being called the production possibilities frontier. All right, we're going to talk about this curve, and this is going to be the first graph that we're going to look at this semester. So formally define the PPC or PPF, they're one and the same thing, just different terminology. Outlines all possible combinations of total output that could be produced, assuming these three assumptions. Number one, there's a fixed amount of productive resources. Okay, so to kind of backtrack a little bit here, the PPC curve outlines all possible combinations of total output. And in this class, we're going to look at two goods, all right, or maybe two categories of goods or services. Okay, so you think about maybe producing good A or good B, or providing a good A service or service A or service B. You want to figure out what's needed to produce each of these items or goods or services, and what resources need to be used to produce each of those. Okay, and with that, there are these assumptions. Number one, we're utilizing a fixed amount of productive resources. All right, so we're utilizing the fixed amount of resources that are available, whether that's labor, whether that's capital, whether that's time, whatever resource we're utilizing. Again, think back to the factors of production. These resources, we have a fixed amount of these, right? A fixed amount of labor, fixed amount of capital, physical capital, human capital, whatever it might be, there's a fixed amount of those that we're utilizing for production. Number two, we're utilizing the given amount of technical knowledge available. All right, so whatever knowledge is available out there, we're utilizing it all. Whether it's technology, whether it's actual knowledge of production, we're utilizing the best resources, the best ways of production that's available. And number three, full and efficient use of resources. And if you're taking notes, this is a assumption here that you want to underline or kind of star. This is a very important one. We're utilizing a full and efficient use of resources. All right, so there's nothing being left to waste. All right, we're fully using all resources available, and we're efficiently using those. So any labor that's available, capital, time that may be available, we're utilizing it all. There's nothing to waste. Okay, so that PPC curve, the actual PPC line, the curve itself, the line, represents those combinations of output that can be produced, again, with these assumptions. So let's talk about, what this PPC curve allows us to answer. Number one, it allows us to answer how much can be produced. Again, based upon the resources that are available, what can be produced with the resources that are available. All right, again, we can look at an aggregate example of this. We can also look at kind of a individual or maybe even a business perspective of this as well. So think about, how much can the U.S. produce, right? With the resources available, what can the U.S. produce? Maybe the U.S. has a choice between producing domestic goods or maybe, defense goods. Again, you might have heard the example of guns and butter, right? Do you spend on defense? Do you spend on domestic goods, i.e. butter? That's a choice that you can make. We can determine how much money should go to defense spending versus domestic spending. You look at an individual or business perspective, maybe, we're trying to figure out, do we want to produce more of good A or more of good B? Maybe as an individual, do we want to spend more of our time maybe working or, bettering ourselves, investing in ourselves, right? Investing in ourselves, going to school versus working. Again, how do we make that decision? How much can be produced? Again, think about in the aggregate. How much defense spending can we have? How much domestic spending can we have? On a business level, how much can we produce of good A and good B? On an individual level, how many hours can I spend going to school and also working? And finally, number two, what will it cost to change that production mix? Again, we've talked about everything has a cost associated with it. And with the PPC curve, we can analyze and see what is the cost of changing that production mix. Again, looking at the aggregate, if the United States decides to spend more money on defense, what's the opportunity cost of giving up domestic spending? If we're looking at a business, if we want to produce more good A than good B, what are we having to give up? What's the cost of making that decision? On an individual level, if we're trying to decide if we want to invest in ourselves, go to school, or work more, Or if we go to school, what are we giving up? All right, what's the cost associated there? So we'll look at that in just a second. So this is what the PPC curve here looks like. We're going to use the example here of a firm that produces beer and liquor. All right, so you can see behind me here the table here of different points that represents different combinations of output. Again, that's our PPC curve. That's our production possibilities curve. It tells us different combinations of output that can be produced given resources available. So here you see different combinations of beer and liquor that can be produced. Again, that first line there, you see 12 bottles, we'll just call it bottles here. 12 bottles of beer can be produced, but when 12 bottles of beer are being produced, all of our resources are being used to produce beer. There's no liquor left. Right? There's no resources left to produce liquor, so we cannot produce any liquor. But as we produce less beer, we can now produce more liquor, okay? All the way down till you see if we produce 0 bottles of beer, we can now produce 6 bottles of liquor. Again, it's all based upon resources available. Again, think about, you know, a firm that may produce beer and liquor, maybe a brewery / distillery kind of combination. Think about individuals in labor and capital. Again, you can't produce all beer and all liquor, right? You have to divert resources to the production of one or the other. All right, so we can take these points here and plot them. And you see the graph here, this PPC curve. You can see this this line here plotted. You can see each and every point plotted, and it creates a line. And again, this line represents the combinations that can be produced with the given resources available. Okay. Now, points on the line, we'll go back here just for a second. Points on this line represents, again, remember those assumptions we talked about, the full and efficient use of resources. There's a fixed amount of productive resources available. We're using the technical knowledge available. Again, full and efficient use of resources. Everything's being used up with these points here. There's nothing left over. There's no resources left over, no capital, no labor. Everything's being used to produce these combinations of beer and liquor, whether it's 12 bottles of beer, 0 bottles of liquor, or 6 bottles of beer, 3 bottles of liquor, or 0 bottles of beer, 6 bottles of liquor. Everything's being used here to produce these two goods. Now, there is a possibility where we're not utilizing all of our resources, or maybe we don't have enough resources. Okay, so points that are below the line here, for example, point I represents combinations of the good that can be produced, but not efficiently. So what do we mean by that? Well, here at point I, you could roughly say that we're producing 4 bottles of beer, or 4,000 bottles of beer, or about 2,000 bottles of liquor. Well, we can produce a lot more, right? We have a lot, maybe we've got some labor that's not being utilized, some individuals, maybe we have some capital that's not being utilized, maybe some space on the factory floor that's being left non-utilized. There's areas where we can improve efficiency, improve production. Okay, so here we could produce more bottles of beer, right? We could produce more bottles of liquor, or maybe produce more of the combination of the two, more bottles of beer and liquor. Again, the point here with anything below the curve is what we call inefficient. All right, there's still resources that can be used to produce more. Points that are above the curve or outside to the right of the curve, i.e. here point H, for example, represents combinations of the goods that cannot be produced. So we would call point H here an unattainable point. Again, point I is inefficient, point H would be unattainable. Why is point H unattainable? Well, go back to the assumptions that we talked about just a few minutes ago. Point H, there's not enough resources to produce, let's say here, 6,000 bottles of beer and 6,000 bottles of liquor. There's not enough resources to do it. Okay, there's not either enough labor or enough capital or enough space to produce that amount of the combination of the amount of bottles of beer and liquor. There's just not enough resources available. Again, remember the assumptions of that PPC curve. Fixed amount of productive resources. We have a fixed amount of resources that we're pulling from. We're utilizing the given technical knowledge. And that number 3, the one I told you to underline, to star, the most important one, is that we're utilizing our full and efficient use of resources. We're utilizing everything that we have. So we can't produce beyond it. All right? It's impossible to produce beyond it because we just don't have the resources available. So again, to kind of summarize, point I here would be inefficient. Points along the curve, all right? So go back here. You know, all these points along this PPC curve would be called efficient points. And then beyond it, point H would be called unattainable. Okay, so make sure you know kind of how to categorize each of these points. Okay, so we talked about finding out how much can be produced. Again, we can look at our curve, we can look at the table to figure out how much of each good is being produced and kind of the different combinations. But what about that cost? Again, remember, I told you opportunity cost is going to come into play. We're going to look at opportunity cost quite a bit. So opportunity cost is, again, remember, going back to chapter 1, that highest valued alternative, what you have to give up. Well, here, when we produce more of one good, we have to give up more of another good. For example, to produce 2 more bottles of liquor, right, 2 bottles of beer must be given up, okay? Or excuse me, to produce 1 more bottle of beer or liquor, excuse me, not 2, 1 more bottle of liquor. So as you see here in this table, as we go from 2 bottles to 3 bottles, we're gaining liquor, but we have to move resources from beer production to liquor production. So we have to give up bottles of beer. In this case, the cost of producing more liquor, of changing the production mix from 2 bottles of liquor and 8 bottles of beer to 3 bottles of liquor and 6 bottles of beer is 2 bottles of beer. Again, the cost of changing that production mix is just the opportunity cost. Okay, so here, as we go from 2 to 3 bottles of liquor, we're giving up 2 bottles of beer. All right, kind of to check to see kind of where we are. Let me ask you this, and you can kind of think about it on your own. All right, if we go from maybe producing 4 bottles of liquor to 5 bottles of liquor, what's our opportunity cost? Take a moment, think about if we go from 4 bottles of liquor to 5 bottles of liquor, what's our cost of changing from 4 to 5? What are we having to give up? If you said 2 bottles of beer, you're absolutely correct. Okay, we have to give up 2 bottles of beer. Now, let's flip it around a little bit. Let's say that we are at this point of 2 bottles of beer, 5 bottles of liquor. If we were to produce 2 more bottles of beer, okay, go from 2 bottles to 4 bottles of beer, all right, what's our opportunity cost? What's the cost of increasing our beer production? Think about it for a second. Again, going from 2 bottles of beer to 4 bottles of beer. If you said 1 bottle of liquor, you're absolutely correct. Again, to increase our production from 2 bottles of beer to 4 bottles of beer, we'd have to give up 1 bottle of liquor, going from 5 down to 4. So again, the change of the cost of changing production mix is just the opportunity cost. That's all it is. Okay. So speaking of opportunity cost, the PPC curve that I showed you was a straight line. Okay. Those of you may have taken economics before, or maybe you've taken micro, macro, or maybe took economics in high school. Maybe remember the PPC curve being kind of a bowed kind of curve shape, like a big hill. Okay, and that's what you're used to seeing. And that is typically how we look at the PPC curve. So we don't typically look at it as a straight line. We looked at it as kind of this bowed out kind of shape to it. Okay, so why is it bowed out? Well, a PPC curve or production possibilities curve is bowed outward because of the concept of increasing opportunity costs. And this is the type of opportunity cost that we're going to look at. You've got decreasing opportunity cost, increasing, and constant opportunity cost. So a straight line would be constant opportunity cost. The opportunity cost doesn't change as we produce more of one good. Right? We're giving up the same amount of another good, but that's not very realistic. Okay. We typically see increasing opportunity costs in the real world. So typically from here on out, we're going to look at a PPC curve that is bowed outward. Okay. So an example of increasing opportunity cost, because I know a lot of students struggle a lot with this term, this concept. So a good example that you can think about to try to help you understand increasing opportunity cost, think about exercise. Okay. When you exercise, whether you're trying to put on weight, put on muscle, or lose weight, you start working out, right? And if you know anything about working out or weight loss, typically when you first start working out, when you haven't done it in a while, and you start trying to lose weight, typically you start losing weight pretty quickly, Okay, if you ever watched the show The Biggest Loser back in the day, when individuals start losing weight or when they start working out, cutting, eating a better diet, working out more, they start losing weight very quickly. Okay, well, what happens a few weeks or maybe a month down the road, or even a couple weeks? What happens to that weight loss? Is it the same as they originally were seeing? No, right? Any of you who may experience this or know anything about this know that you lose the most weight at the beginning and it kind of tapers off. It gets harder and harder to lose weight as you've lost weight. Again, as you continue to lose weight, the last few pounds are the hardest to get off. Okay, so you think about exercising, going to the gym, maybe spending an hour each day at the gym, losing weight. Think about the opportunity cost when you first begin compared to a few weeks, maybe a month down the road. But when you first begin, that opportunity cost is very, very small, right? It's very small. When you first start working out, when you first start losing weight, that hour that you spend at the gym is very valuable, right? You're losing a lot of weight, you're seeing results. It's a great time. However, a couple of weeks down the road, maybe a month down the road, maybe when you're only losing maybe a few ounces or maybe a pound a week versus maybe 5 pounds, or if you're pretty successful at the beginning, if you're only losing a pound a week or maybe a pound every 2 weeks, all right, the opportunity cost of that hour at the gym, you're not getting those results, becomes a lot higher, right? Becomes a lot higher. You could be using that time to be more productive elsewhere, maybe more efficient elsewhere than at the gym. Okay, so this idea here, when you first start working out, you start losing a lot of weight, opportunity cost is very small, right? You're very productive at the gym, you're getting a good use of your time. However, later on, again, not advocating that you shouldn't be going to the gym or taking care of yourself, but as you go later on, the opportunity cost inevitably gets higher because you're losing less weight. That'd be an example of increasing opportunity cost. Okay, as you produce more of one good, you're giving up more of another. That opportunity cost is going to get larger and larger and larger. Right. So this is typically what we see as a realistic or PPC curve, or production possibilities curve. Again, notice as we go from each production point, again here, producing less and less bottles of beer, more and more bottles of liquor, what we see here is that the opportunity cost increases. And intuitively, how you can think about this, or what you want to think about, is as you produce more bottles of liquor, you're giving up more and more bottles of beer. All right, well, it becomes more costly as you give up more and more and more bottles of beer. You think about at point A, you've got lots of bottles of beer. You got 12,000 bottles of beer, no bottles of liquor. However, as you produce more liquor, you're giving up more beer, right? And as you give up more and more beer, there's less and less beer available. It becomes more costly because you're giving up more and more and more. You have less beer available, okay? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. As you produce more, you're giving up more and more and more, and that opportunity cost, again, think about that, beer becomes more valuable, right? The less you have, the more valuable it gets, the more costly it becomes to give it up. A couple other questions that you may have that maybe I didn't kind of cover well. Think about this PPC curve, point A, point B, point C, point D. All these points on this curve are indifferent, right? You're indifferent between each and every one of these. It comes down to, you might ask, well, where should we produce at? Well, it depends on what do you want to produce, right? Do you want to produce more beer? Do you want to produce more liquor? What does the market look like? You think about a good example, think about during COVID-19, a lot of the distilleries and sometimes some breweries switched from making alcohol to hand sanitizer, right? Again, you think about, during normal circumstances, producing, beer was very profitable. But however, during the pandemic, again, a lot of these breweries had to shut down. It was very costly to keep producing beer, whereas they could switch their resources over to produce hand sanitizer, which was more profitable. However, when everything opens back up, they're probably going to switch back again to producing beer or producing liquor, because again, that opportunity cost would kind of change in the marketplace. So again, it all is based upon kind of forces in the market, which we'll talk more about in chapter 3. But again, where do you produce at? It's up to you, the individual producer, the firm, the individual. But again, all those points you would be pretty indifferent to. Again, the point here is that you're utilizing all of your resources. That's the point. All right. right, so moving forward here, so let's look at an example, and let's look at an individual example. So let's look at you as a student and choices that you can make with your most important resource, and that is time. All right, so we're going to say that there's two things you can use your time to produce. That is partying and working out, right? So you can use your time to either party, go out and party, or work out. Okay, again, one of those is probably the more productive choice. And then the other one's probably a little bit more of a fun choice. But let's talk about, what we talked about already. Use this example. Let's point out the efficient points, inefficient points, unattainable points. Let's look at how much is being produced at each point and the opportunity cost. Okay, so let's look at our points here. Okay, so you see our PPC curve, our production possibilities curve, and we're looking at partying versus studying. Okay, so we're going to walk through this. All right, so if you're a little bit confused, don't worry, we're going to walk through this. On the x-axis, down below, we've got pounds lost. Okay, so we're going to talk about working out. We're going to talk about pounds lost here. Okay, so we've got 5 pounds, 7.5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds lost when it comes to weight loss. Okay, so again, the more you work out, the more weight you're going to lose. Okay, that's typically how it goes. So we're going to use that as our kind of metric there for working out, not necessarily hours. Again, that's your resource you're utilizing. But what we want to look at here is what are you producing with working out? And again, that would be weight loss. So 5, 7.5, 10, 15, 20. Now, on the other end, we've got GPA. So instead of partying and working out, I had a mistake there in the slide. We're going to look at studying and working out. Okay, both good things. All right, but which one do we want to choose? So instead of partying, we're going to look at GPA and studying. So studying here, and not partying, again, all these slides are messed up. I apologize. Working out and studying. So working out at the bottom of the graph here on the x-axis, studying, the hours of studying, we're going to measure that production with GPA, right? The more you study, the higher GPA you should get in theory. Okay, so the more hours you spend studying, the higher GPA you should expect to get. So notice here, the GPA, we're going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 3.6 to 4.0. Now, what we see here, we have our efficient points, right? You should have pointed those out. A, B plus B, C, D, and F are our efficient points. They're attainable, they're efficient. We're utilizing all the time we have available to study and to work out. Now, again, we can kind of pick where we are here. We can use all of our time to study and get a 4.0, but we're not going to lose any weight. On the flip side, we could spend all of our time working out, losing 20 pounds, but we had no time to study. We're going to assume we're not going to get any grades. We're not attending school at all. And then there's everything in between, right? We could spend part of the time studying, part of the time working out to lose some weight and to get a high GPA. Notice the unattainable points, right? Or point here. Point X, again, it's outside of the curve. It's outside the PPC curve. We don't have the time available here to get a, what could be a 3.7 GPA and lose 12 pounds. There's just not enough time in the day for us to achieve that. Point Y here would be inefficient, right? Again, here, we'll assume that it's losing 7.5 pounds and getting a 3.0 GPA. Notice here, we're not utilizing our time. Maybe we're wasting time, but we can utilize our time more to study more. Maybe we study more. Instead of getting 3.0, we get a 3.6. We could work out more. So instead of losing 7.5 pounds, we lose 10 pounds. Or maybe we split the time up and we study more and work out more to get a little bit of higher GPA, but also lose more pounds. All right, so again, point Y is inefficient. We can utilize our time better to get to that PPC curve, to get to the gold curve there. Again, point X is unattainable. We cannot produce at that level. And so hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more kind of how to read the PPC curve and answer questions. All right, so here's an example here. If we have a virtual session, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more. But if this is an online class, if you want to go ahead and kind of pause the video here and use these points here, kind of draw out a PPC curve, kind of draw out your curve, see what it looks like, and answer the questions that are going to be upcoming. So if you're watching this and you want to do this activity now, go ahead and pause the video, kind of draw your graph out, and then when you're done, hit play and we'll continue to talk. So if you've got your graph drawn out, you should have most of your points on the PPC curve, on the PPC. You might have some points, you should have, I think, 1 point that's beyond it and 1 point that's inside of the curve. Everything else should be on the curve. So let's look at some questions here. How much is being produced at point D? All right, so I don't have the curve here on my iPad, or I don't have it in front of me, but if we look here, should be able to go to point B and see that we have 160, again, we could call this reams of paper, and 30 pranks here. Again, this example here comes from The Office, right? So if you're an Office fan, hopefully you enjoy this example. Some little background here in The Office, if you're not familiar. You've got Jim Halpert and Dwight Schrute both work at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. And we're looking at Jim's PPC curve. Okay. And Jim can use his time at work to do one of two things. He can sell paper, which is what his job is to do, or he can play pranks on Dwight. Okay. So here at point D, he can use all of his time to sell 160 reams of paper and play 30 pranks on Dwight. So looking here at the answer should be C. Again, 160 reams of paper and 30 pranks. Again, pretty easy just to read the graph to figure out what's being produced. Second question, what is the opportunity cost of moving from point C to point E? All right, so take a moment here, look at your graph. We can go back here and look at our table here. What's our opportunity cost? Again, let's refresh the question here of moving from point C to point E. So we're going from C to E. All right, what's our opportunity cost? Well, if we go from point C to point E, what you want to look at is what are our combinations? Well, at point C, we have 100 units or 100 reams of paper being sold and 17 pranks. At point E, we have, again, 100 reams of paper being sold, but 60 pranks being played on Dwight. So what are we giving? So the question is, what's the opportunity cost of moving from point C to point E? In other words, what are we giving up as we produce more of one good? Well, think about it. As we produce more pranks, are we giving up any paper? We're not giving any paper up. So looking at this question, is there an opportunity cost here? No. All right. Again, there's nothing given up. In other words, point C here is an inefficient point. We can produce more pranks, or in this case, pranks, by utilizing our time better, right, to move to point E. So nothing is giving up. So moving from an inefficient point to an efficient point, typically there's no opportunity cost associated with that movement. Now, what if we move from point B to point E? All right, what would our opportunity cost here look like? Well, let's go back here real quick. We move from point B to point E. Well, think about what are we gaining and what are we giving up? Well, if we're moving from B to E, we're gaining 30 reams of paper and we're giving up 20 pranks. Okay, so in this case, what's our opportunity cost here? Well, it should be represented by what are we giving up as we move. All right, in this case, it should be 20 pranks. Again, as we add more paper, we're giving up pranks. All right, hopefully this makes sense to you. All right, again, if you have questions, be sure to email me and I'll be more than happy to help you with that. The last thing we're going to talk about is PPC and economic growth. So we talked about some of those unattainable points and inefficient points, excuse me. Well, there can be an instance where the unattainable points become attainable, right? Or the inefficient points become efficient, or efficient points become inefficient. Again, that PPC curve that we looked at isn't static. It can move. It can shift out. It can shift in based upon what's happening in the economy, what's happening with the business, what's happening with the individual. So PPC can shift to the right as the economy grows. So think about the aggregate. Think about the U.S. economy. The PPC curve for the U.S. can shift to the right, again, based upon economic growth. So as resources expand, right, so we maybe have an increase in the population, again, the labor force, maybe an increase in human capital, maybe a more educated labor force, maybe more inventions or technology, maybe more capital that's being produced. All these can impact the PPC curve. You can think about improving technologies. Think about automobile production. Again, originally, automobile production before the assembly line was a very kind of time-intensive process. After Henry Ford invented the assembly line, it really fast-tracked automobile production, made it much more efficient, and effective to produce mass amount of vehicles, again, lowering the price and making them very affordable as well. So again, improving technologies can lead to economic growth and shifting out the PPC curve. All right, so again, we say shifting out, think about shifting it outward. So the whole curve shifts to the right, as you see here. So moving from PPC 0, or our original PPC curve, outward. Again, that could be due to an increase in the labor force, increase to capital. Anything that increases our factors of production could shift that curve outward. Now, you can also see the curve shift inward. Okay, again, it can go in both directions. We're going to talk about some things that can, some aspects, some determinants that can help us understand how the curve is going to shift. Again, an outward shift would mean economic growth. So some 4 factors, and we're going to talk about 4 factors that can shift the PPC. Number 1, a change in the economy's resource base. Obviously, this can shift the PPC. So you think about investment. We're defining investment here, the purchase, construction, or development of resources. As investment increases for resources, think about maybe a country or business invests in their labor force or their employees. Maybe the individual invests in themselves. Again, you're developing resources and investing in order to get more production later on, right? Think about investing yourself right now in getting an education. You're investing in yourself today so that you can be more productive tomorrow, right? Maybe earn a higher salary in the future, maybe work a little bit less in the future to make the same amount of money. Whatever it might be, you're investing in yourself today to be more productive in the future. Again, businesses can do the same thing. They can invest in their employees so they're more productive in the future. A nation can do the same thing, investing in its population to be more productive in the future. So again, investment, though, requires us to give up some consumption goods today. You think about investing in yourself, right? There's an opportunity cost associated with that, right? You could be working, but you have to give up some time working to take classes, right? Some of you may be working full-time and taking classes full-time, but a lot of you, it can be difficult to do that. So you take fewer classes, or maybe you cut back on hours to take more classes, right? But you're giving up, again, that money that you're spending to get an education, to get your degree, you could be using to spend money. Maybe you buy a new car, maybe a new TV, maybe take a trip somewhere, but you're using that money to invest in yourself in order so you can make more money in the future, be more productive in the future. So again, that's one way we can change the economy's resource base, is by investing in those resources to be more productive in the future. Again, shifting that curve further out in the future. Number 2, changes in technology. All right, so technology can change over time. Again, technology defined as the knowledge available in an economy at any given time. As technology progresses, right, the PPC will shift outward as well. Okay, so you think about this. An example, think about electricity, or better yet, computers, right? How has computers changed productivity? Well, think back to maybe your parents or maybe grandparents when they went to school. If they wanted to write a research paper, what did they have to do? They had to go to the library, right? They had to go to the library and check out these things called books, right? And maybe look at this, a bigger book that I don't know if you've ever used one. I don't know if I'm aging myself here quite, but you think about the encyclopedias, right? Going to the library, and in the reference section, you couldn't check these books out, but you could, grab an encyclopedia and look in and get resources. Again, you think about Wikipedia in a book. Again, it took time to research, whereas now you can do it. You could research a paper from your smartphone, right? On the go. Right? Very easy to do. And again, it allows you to be more productive than your parents were, going through school. So again, changes in technology can shift out your PPC curve. Think about the time that you have now being more productive. You have more time available because of changes in technology. Your individual PPC curve is going to shift outward. It's going to shift to the right because now you can accomplish more things with the technology available. Okay, so again, that can shift the curve to the right. Number 3, a change in the rules under which the economy functions. So as rules change, the PPC curve can change with it. So a positive and negative example, think about patents. All right, I'm not sure if we've defined patents in this course yet. If you don't know what a patent is, it's a intellectual protection or protection of an intellectual right. So think about maybe an invention or an idea. You can apply for a patent that protects that idea for a time being, keeping competition out and allowing you to be benefit off of that idea. Okay, there's pros and cons to it, but one of the pros is that it incentivizes production, or incentivizes intellectual thought, incentivizes inventions, incentivizes individuals to come up with better new ideas to do things, better products, better technologies. So with that, if you have a patent-friendly country, you're going to be having individuals incentivized to produce good ideas, to produce inventions, produce products that can help individuals be more productive. And in turn, that will shift the PPC curve outward. Okay, so PPC curve shifted outward with a patent-friendly country. Now, a negative view, think about the Jim Crow laws. Okay, so laws that really limited the rights of African Americans. Again, these laws had a negative impact. I know they were very negative laws to begin with. Not a great time for the country to begin with, but when you look at it economically, it wasn't great as well. Right? Think about limiting the rights for African Americans, limiting where they could work, really impacts the PPC. Think about if you're limiting the workforce, maybe limiting the amount of individuals willing to or available to work at businesses, limiting the human capital, the great minds that would be available to work just because of their skin color, really can impact the PPC. And that would be an example of shifting the PPC inward. Again, shifting it inward, reducing the labor force, reducing the amount of human capital available could, really impact the economy and the economic production in an economy, in a bit, or in a business. Okay, so that'd be a negative shift for the PPC. Okay, so positive, negative shift there, depending upon the type of rules under which the economy functions. And then finally and lastly, changes in work habits. All right, so again, this kind of is more applicable to an individual, but the harder working you are, the further your curve's going to shift out, right? You think about, you read articles about individuals, very successful individuals. Think about Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, these billionaires, soon probably to be trillionaires, very successful individuals. You hear a lot of times, what their daily routines look like. Maybe you watched a video on kind of, what they do, or watched a show, or maybe a documentary, or maybe read an article. A lot of these individuals are very productive, very efficient with their time. They wake up early, they go to bed late, and they're very efficient with their time. Well, again, the more efficient you are with time, the more hours you can utilize during the day, the more productive you're going to be, the further your PPC is going to shift out. Okay, the further out it's going to shift. So again, the harder working you are, the more it's going to shift out to the right. Working less can shift it inward. Another good example here, think about the time that you're spending in this course now, or maybe a lot of your other courses now, compared to what the time you're going to be spending during final exam week. Well, this first week of classes, first couple weeks of classes, you're probably not spending that much time in the class. I mean, trust me, it wasn't too long ago I was a student. I know how it goes, right? You get excited for the syllabus day in class. The first week is syllabus week, right? You're not doing anything. You show up, you get the syllabus, you go home, it's great, right? But as the course goes on, as you get near exam times, especially final exams, right, you're spending much more time in the class, whether you're getting up early, most of you pulling all-nighters, trying to study for your exams, you're being much more productive. So during final exam week, you think about your PPC is going to be shifted outward more to the right than it will be this first week of classes. All right, so again, working harder, working less can shift your curve inward or outward. Okay, so hopefully this video has been helpful. Walking through the PPC or PPF, kind of whatever you're familiar with. Be sure to use the resources available to kind of learn this more. If you have questions, email me. If you're struggling or just can't figure out how to read the graph, or you're just confused or have questions, email me, message me. Post your question in the course discussion board. maybe a fellow classmate can answer it. I'll check that here and there as well. But you've got options there if you're maybe struggling with this. Again, this is the first graph of the semester. So again, take the time, make sure you understand it before we move forward. So again, hopefully you have a good rest of your day, good rest of your week. Hopefully this video has been beneficial. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm here, I'm available. That's my job, is to help you succeed. So don't feel ashamed, don't feel bashful. Reach out to me, post a question somewhere. It's better to get those answered now versus later on down the road when everything kind of gets stacked on top of each other. So again, I hope to see you guys very soon. Have a good rest of your day. Have a good rest of your week. And I'll see you guys in the next video.